Alrighty. I'm just gonna I was gonna say jump and then dive, and I said jive. I'm gonna dive into another one. So the one I want to do now is, let's see, I have a few. I think the one I'm gonna choose is The Power of Stories. Yeah, let's go with that one.
I made a video in a while. I've been busy with my book. It's been kicking my ass, and I just thought that, I just went for a run, and I have to cool down anyway, so I thought I might as well make a video while I'm cooling off. And I guess I'll talk about my book again, or rather, so one of the early chapters of my book is about storytelling, and it's challenging for me because I feel like I could write an entire book about storytelling itself, and I have to condense it into one chapter.
Yeah, you should.
So I figure I might get some of it out of my system by talking about it in video, writing blog posts about it. I haven't even been able to write a blog post about it because where do you start? There's so much to say. And I think the good thing about videos is that they force you to just start wherever, and you're on the spot, and you just have to keep going. So, stories.
It just occurred to me, I know you don't edit your videos at all, and I'm a fan of that. Such a pain in the ass to do. But people do make video essays where they do structure it and they do outline things, and theoretically you could just do these first draft improvised videos, and then in order to turn them into something more polished, all you would have to do is play around with the editing, and kind of like being a story director of a reality TV show or whatever the title is that they have. They just take all the stuff that was said and then they arrange it into the right narrative. So you could literally just do that with the videos that you create. You wouldn't have to even write anything new. Yeah, just a thought. These are also all ideas I'm vocalizing for myself.
I have a few stories about stories that I tend to tell. One is about Scheherazade from 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights. And, she's a fictitious character, right? It's a story of stories. So the 1001 stories that you read in 1001 Nights are told from the perspective of Scheherazade telling her husband stories every night. And the plot there is that her husband has had a wife who cheated on him or something like that, and he went nuts at the betrayal, and so he started marrying a different woman every day and then killing her at the end of the day. Messed up, sociopathic, fucked up shit. But Scheherazade, who was the vizier's daughter, I believe, she pled for her life by telling a story, and then, it's like she stopped in the middle of the night, in the middle of the story, and her husband, the Sultan, wants to know the rest of the story, so he lets her live one more day. And this goes on. She finishes one story, she starts the next. This goes on for 1001 nights. And at the end of it, he decides that he's in love with her, he's not going to kill her. She gets her life. Twisted story. Problematic, right? But even then, when I read it as a child, I remember thinking, holy shit. Stories can save your life. That's my takeaway, right? Stories are compelling. People get drawn in. Stories can save your life.
And in so many different ways. And that's just one very concrete, very intense way in which it can save your life. But man, there's so many more.
What else? Another thing I think about is documentaries. And, there are a bunch of people that I follow, on Instagram and stuff, because I saw them in some reality TV show or some documentary. There is this Netflix show called Cars to Riches. I'm not sure, but it's about like a garage, a group of people who work in a garage who refurbish cars, right? They buy junky cars, they upgrade it, they resell it. And it's just, I was very drawn into the drama of running the operation and the decisions they had to make and the challenges and the constraints they faced and their personalities and their personal struggles. And so I grew to like them, and I follow a couple of them on Instagram now. And same for, I remember watching a couple of episodes of Bondi Inc. right, which was like it's some tattoo studio in Australia. And again, you watch a few episodes, and reality TV show producers, they have to know how to hook you in.
Fucking weird that I mentioned reality TV show producers in the beginning of this video.
And so they have to tell you these human stories with human conflicts, and you get invested. And once you get invested, you start to care about the characters, right? And again, that's the power of storytelling. Even if the story is not entirely true to life, right? It's embellished in some ways, it's exaggerated in some ways, maybe some parts are even entirely fake. But still, if enough of a vibe comes through and you like it, then...
I'll just put that question out there. Is that wrong, Because a lot of people around here on Twitter really have problems with marketing, and one of the big ones is the ethics and lying and stuff like that. And there's a huge crossover between marketing and storytelling. And yes, sometimes stories involve elements that are exaggerated or not true for the sake of the story. And what do we make of that? Is that unethical? Is that wrong? Or is there a hell of a lot of value in doing so? Anyway, just an aside.
You get drawn in, you care about the characters. Another thing I like to talk about there is this tweet I once saw, which is of a lady who was in an Uber, right? She was taking her car. She was getting a ride share to drive to get somewhere else. There's a photo of the driver, and then there's a child's drawing around it, and it's written. It says, "Please be patient with my father. His English is not very good. He is my hero," something like that. And then there's a drawing of the child and the dad, and the lady who texted the photo, she tweeted the photo of that, drawing and photograph of the father, the driver, and she said, "I'm crying in the Uber right now." And again, that's another example of, every Uber you've ever been in, the driver has a story, right? The driver has a life. The driver has some struggles that you don't know about. And his daughter, presumably, let's assume she's telling the truth. Let's assume it's a good story. It's a feel-good story. Let's assume it's the truth, right? His daughter made him a 1 A4 size document, a piece of paper that he could display hanging off the back seat of the car. I mean, the back of the front seat, so that the passenger can see, right? It's one image, and that image is so powerful that it moves the passenger to tweet it, share it. Thousands of people shared it, and again,
let alone how they treat the driver, right? Compared to how they might treat a driver who they can't understand very well and are just getting impatient with.
That's the power of storytelling, right? It's just reminding the passenger that the driver is a human being. He's my father. I love him. Please be patient with him. I would like universal basic storytelling, right? I would like to reach a point where every single human being treats every other human being with love and respect and kindness. We're not quite there yet, right?
Just before you continue, something I was reminded of with those stories, I remember watching, I think on Netflix it was called Street Food Asia or something, and at least the couple episodes I watched were about some street food vendors, one in Japan and one in, I think it might have been the Philippines or Indonesia, and just, what's their life story, what their family life is like how is it that they ended up doing this street food, how they're doing the street food has allowed them to, do other things in their life. And it's just crazy, especially when we're talking about somewhere like Southeast Asia, for example, or Mexico, or places where street food is so much more prevalent than in the United States or in England or whatever. It's just holy shit, all these people that I walk by every single day what in the world is their story? You know, you do forget that these are humans with their own lives and problems, and it was super fascinating and I don't know what word to say. Something about empathy. There's no word for what I'm trying to say, but it made you feel like more appreciative of them and in awe of them, and more empathy towards them, to realize that, like, wow, every one of these people, you know, wakes up at like 2 a.m. and goes to the market and buys the stuff and then spends the entire morning while I'm still fucking asleep, you know, prepping the food, and then all day they're out here selling, and then they spend the rest of the day packing it down, and like, when do they even sleep, you know? It's powerful stuff.
So in the meantime, one way to elicit sympathy, empathy, compassion, blah, 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 is to tell your stories. It shouldn't have to be this way, but it is the way it is. And another thing I remember seeing a tweet about was like about documentaries again, and someone was saying, oh, when I watch a documentary about, so I don't know the precise animals, is it the seals that eat the penguins? The big seals, right? Not the small ones. I'm going to embarrass myself, but let's just say it's the seals that eat the penguins, and you can correct me in the comments. It says that, you know, when you see this, when it's a documentary about seals, and you see it going after the penguins, you're like, hell yeah, lunchtime for the seals. Whereas when it's a documentary about penguins, you're like, fuck off, seals, you know, like, get out of there. Don't mess with this penguin that I have become emotionally attached to. Right? Again, that's the power of storytelling. And so
which narrative you're in defines who the enemy is, or the same person can be an enemy depending on which narrative you're in. Fuck. Like, I've never thought about it that way exactly, or I've never articulated it that way exactly, but fuck, let that sink in. Jesus. It's like, if you think about yourself, a documentary made from the point of view of like your best friend versus a documentary made from the point of view of your arch nemesis versus a documentary made from your own point of view, who you are and the role you play in each one of those is going to be so wildly different.
In all of that, you are the main character in your life. And are you rooting for yourself? Are you emotionally invested in your success? Do you care? Do you pay attention to the story that you tell yourself about who you are, what your life's about, what your struggles are, what the conflicts are, what it's all about? I would say, you know, a lot of people that I talk to, it's chaotic, right? And that's why we're drawn to stories, because stories are elegant, stories are simple relative to life. Life is chaotic, right? In a good story, the character wants something, right? And there's something in the way that stops them from that. And we see them make decisions to try and deal with that obstacle, and how they struggle and what decisions they make. That's what makes us root for them, right? You know, Batman lost his parents, and so he wants justice in Gotham, and so he does what he does. Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, she just wanted to go home, right? And then there was all that stuff in the way that she had to do. And yeah, every character wants something, and there's an obstacle in the way that stops them from getting it. Wreck-It Ralph is a beautiful story. And whereas in life, we tend to want a lot of conflicting things, right? And so it's more complicated than that. But I believe that it's useful to examine the story that you tell yourself about your life. And, you know, whenever we talk to some people say things like, oh, I don't know how to tell stories, I'm not a storyteller, I'm just some guy. Sure, but that, you know, that's like saying, I'm not a comedian, I can't tell jokes. You don't need to be a comedian.
I'm going to just jump in here. You might address this, but while I agree with this stuff, I also feel a lot of caution myself around going overboard with trying to put a story onto your life, whether on the large scale, long-term narrative or like around events. Because I don't know if you've seen this, whoever's listening, I did a 21 days of sensitivity writing series. And I just, for the most part, it was a lot of stories about different parts of my life. And in the last one, I wrote basically that I was like, you know what? Maybe I need to quit doing this for a little while, because I was feeling that it was as if I was prematurely trying to make sense of my life by telling these nice, crisp stories, that would resonate for other people, right? Like, because life really is so chaotic, like, you are doing a disservice to yourself to try to package it into a story before you've really, like, sat with it and experienced every aspect of that. Otherwise, yeah, basically you're just like, I think it's like another way of, someone who becomes like a vlogger or an Instagrammer, right? And they're just all about, not like you, but they're all about growing, and they're all about getting clicks and view time and all this stuff, right? And so suddenly their entire frame of mind about their life is like, how do I construct my life and tell the story of my life in a way that's going to be entertaining for other people? And when you do that, like, yes, you may be successful in that, but like, how much of your own life do you miss and ignore because you're really living for other people? So there's got to be a balance. And I experienced when I did that writing series that, I told all true stories, but like, in the process of trying to tell them as such, you have to emphasize certain things and downplay certain things, and it shapes your own sense of your own life. And if you haven't really processed the experiences you're trying to write about, then you can perhaps blind yourself to your own reality in a way that I don't think is such a good idea. But yeah, you're not saying that. I was reminded of that happening, and I thought it was worth sharing.
Media to tell jokes, right? We all tell jokes all the time. We spot something funny and we say it, and people laugh, and that's a joke. Similar, and all this. Actually,
let me just continue with that. I think that's one of the big values of privacy, and it's one of the reasons why I've been hesitant at times more and less to share too much on Twitter, and it's why I'm still like fairly private about who I am and the exact details of my life on Twitter, because I think there's an incredible amount of value in processing things within yourself first, and then progressively widening the circles with which you share that stuff, right? So you have an experience, you sit with that experience, you experience the full thing for yourself, and then once you've like kind of juiced it and processed it for what it is, then you can decide, like, okay, I'm going to share these elements of my experience truthfully with other people so that they can know me, but I'm not just gonna like jump ahead and not try to process my own experience, but like tell everyone else what the fuck's going on with my life ASAP. I think that can get a little backwards, and certainly in the times when I've gotten particularly addicted to using Twitter all the time, it does feel like you're putting the cart before the horse, and we're like, you just think of your life in terms of like, oh, what can I say on Twitter, rather than like, oh, I should just sit down with myself and be like, what the fuck did I do today? How did I feel about it? So anyway,
the guy from Pixar, Andrew Stanton, he said that all storytelling is joke telling, right? Because there's a setup, there's a punchline, expectations, whatever. And every time we meet every time you scroll through the text with your friends, and you'll find that you're telling each other micro stories all the time. You're like, hey, this just happened. Hey, I'm gonna do this. hey, I'm struggling with that. Hey, this just happened, right? Like it might not feel like you're telling stories, but you are. There's an elaborate, complex world building that's happening. And when you have a group of friends, there's a shared story. You can go so far. Nation states, nations are entities with shared stories, right? That's why the flag of your country is a symbol that represents the shared story of your people, right? And brands are representatives of archetypes. Nike's Just Do It or whatever. It's just a brand.
Although, quick aside on that, I didn't know this for a long time, but I was doing research into who were the marketers behind Nike's famous slogan and everything. And then I found out the story about that, and it's pretty funny because Just Do It actually comes from, so the guys that worked on it, pretty sure it was Wyden and Kennedy, is a big ad agency, kind of an indie ad agency, and the guys who came up with Just Do It, the story is actually that those were basically the last words of this serial killer back in, I don't know, the 60s or something, and he was going to get capital punishment. He was going to get executed finally by a firing squad. And his last words were basically, just do it. And so the Wyden and Kennedy guys were like, that's kind of badass. And so they were on a deadline or some shit, and so they were like, oh, let's try that. And then they presented it to the Nike people, and the Nike people were really into it, and that stuck. So, yeah, very undertold story, in my opinion, that the Just Do It of Nike actually is the famous last words of a serial killer before getting killed as a punishment. So make of that what you will.
And is a manifestation, a representation of some kind of archetype, some kind of story. And so, I'm not saying that you should become a brand. Rather, be mindful of the way that stories are imposed upon us, right? Because there's a lot of people who want to tell you what your life's about, right? Your peers, your parents, society. And so it's worth being homebrew about this. That's what I'm passionate about. I want to arm the rebels, basically, right? I want people to be able to tell their own stories so that you don't get boxed in by the stories that are imposed upon you. Right? I'm not going to tell you what story you should believe in, but you should think about that for yourself. Done.
Yeah.
So I've talked.
Something I tweeted not too long ago was I had been watching an interview with some copywriters, and I have a lot of baggage around copywriting, even though that's my profession. And so I was listening to this, and my other big interest is therapy and self-work, that sort of thing, psychology. So I've always been wondering, what's the crossover between these two things? In what way can they work together, or in what way are they at odds, etc., etc. And one of the copywriters was saying basically, when you're writing copy, one of the things that's essential is really knowing who you're writing to and knowing the life story of your audience and your reader, right? So specifically by life story, what's the story about their life that they tell themselves about their past and their future? So what is the story of their future that they currently hold? And so in the process of writing copy, you let them know, basically, you let them see that you understand the story that they have of themselves. And then progressively you start to show them that, actually, you could tell a different story about your future. You could tell this other story about your future. It doesn't have to be the one that you're telling yourself right now. And, obviously within the context of copywriting, that means like a story which involves buying whatever thing. Which I say that, and obviously probably the instinctual response for even myself and most people is like, oh, well, if it's just for the purpose of getting someone to buy things, then it's bad. But there are a lot of good things that people would benefit a lot from buying, and so doing the work to convince them to buy it is a very valuable thing. And it doesn't even have to be buying things. Like, there are behaviors, right, and life choices that people would do well to make. And convincing them of that is what copywriting is about. So, anyway, I made this connection when I was listening to that interview. I was like, oh shit, like, that's what narrative therapy is about. It's about investigating what is a person's life narrative and then showing them that they can rewrite that, which is exactly what you're talking about as well. And it's like, oh shit, well, I guess in a way then, copywriting is very much the same, or in many ways analogous to narrative therapy. It doesn't have to be this like predatory, manipulative thing. It's about getting to know someone really, really well, empathizing with them, building trust with them, and starting to show them progressively that they can tell a different story about the future than the one they feel stuck in. And to me, that's amazing. And that makes copywriting extremely exciting again for me. So I thought I'd throw that in there. And as you say, done.